Edward Pierce, the Tony-nominated scenic designer for Angels in America, currently playing on Broadway. Thanks so much for joining me here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I wanted to start right away. You're nominated alongside Ian McNeill for scenic design, and your billing is scenic adaptation. And I think there's probably a few viewers who maybe are not familiar with that specific term for scenic. Just kind of summarizing what your job position entails.
Sure. I've worked with Ian on several projects, most notably Billy Elliot for many, many years. We've done productions all around the world. And with every production, everyone's role is always a little unique. And in this instance, when the show opened, when Angels in America opened at the National Theater at the Lyttelton Theater last summer, they wanted to explore bringing it to Broadway. And one of the first people involved with that was me. I went over and took a look at it before we were even confirmed coming to Broadway. And the challenge really was, it was a massive production that used every aspect of the physical elements associated and inherent with the Lyttelton at the National, which is a huge stage and allows you to have very large pieces of scenery, lots of wing space to move them into the wings for storage. And the challenge, of course, moving to the Broadway theater at the Neil Simon is that it's very, very small. It's about half the size. And it really required kind of some overarching rethinking of the design to be able to capture the ideas that Marianne Elliott, the director, had over in London and bring those ideas and enhance those ideas as we brought it to New York. So my job really primarily entailed figuring out how to take all of the design ideas that the lighting designer, the set designer, the director, the choreographers all had, and lay them all out on a table and figure out how it is that we were going to achieve that on Broadway. And it really is a design job. Ian is a great friend of mine and a great colleague, and it's just not his forte to do that type of thing. He is a good conceiver. He loves details. He loves architecture. But when it comes to how to figure out how to rethink it and bring it all in and try to figure out how to store it and how to automate it, it's just not his bailiwick. And that's really how I entered in and really worked on transitions and figured out how we're going to massage that show into the Neil Simon Theater.
Does it, if there is, it's almost sort of like you have to translate it in a new way. Does that create more pressure, the fact that it's something that had existed elsewhere that you have to now reinterpret here?
Yeah, translation is really a perfect way to put it, right? So, and usually, I mean, I've done a lot of shows overseas, and we always have translators, but actually, you learn what their true terminology and their true job is: interpreters. And in many ways, it's the same thing here. We have to take an idea that was expressed one way and interpret it in a new environment so that it still expresses the same artistic contention and delivers the same joy and the same storytelling that it did before, but in a better way, because you always want to make something better when you bring it to Broadway. You don't want to have to cut ideas. You always want to add ideas. And so not only did we have to recreate, that was a huge challenge, recreate what was done before, but actually make it better.
Was there anything then that was sort of, did anything drastically change, like was inspired by the theater itself, given the space that you were in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, design at its heart is a reaction to the space. Whatever venue you're in, that is the proportion and the shape and the energy that it gives is what you have to react to, especially as the Angels in America design starts off primarily more realistic, although it's somewhat not entirely realistic, but it starts more realistic. And over the course of the 8 hours of the play, as the characters start to strip away, so does the design. It becomes more and more minimal. Ultimately, to the end of the play, at the end of Perestroika, in the epilogue, we fly all of the scenic masking out. We're looking at the back wall of the Neil Simon. We're looking deep into the wing and seeing nothing. And so the challenge, honestly, in this space was, where does everything go? At the Lyttelton in London, there was vast amounts of wing space off stage and upstage, and everything had a home. And the Neil Simon, most of our challenge was to figure out so that we can reveal the empty space. It's a really Brechtian moment at the end of Perestroika. where does everything go? So we had to be inspired not only how to present the actors in the best way and the best design methods, but we also had to figure out how to physically stick everything somewhere, every little nook and cranny.
I wanted to talk about Perestroika too, because you're right, it does sort of, it's almost like the walls, everything flies away. And, you know, whereas part one, there's lots of revolving set pieces, part two, everything opens up considerably. Can you just talk about sort of the challenges of essentially designing more bare space?
Absolutely. I think you're right. At the beginning, the first two acts of Millennium is all about somewhat real spaces with some walls, sparsely furnished rooms, and it transitions rather seamlessly between those. There's 67 scenic transitions in the show. As we move into the third act of Millennium, it starts to become a little bit more hallucinogenic. Harper has an image of going and being in Antarctica, and we kind of drift the whole set away. That initially was a challenge for us because we needed to still maintain an even acting surface throughout the rest of the play. And to do that, we installed, we excavated out about half of the stage space of the Neil Simon down into the trap room so we could install a 30-foot wide by 12-foot deep lift that would allow us to be able to shift all of those walls upstage and then bring the stage floor back up to level for Perestroika, where generally speaking, it's a very bare, sparse space where we bring in smaller elements. In Millennium, we had outlined all the walls with a little bit of neon around the edges of walls. And as we go through Perestroika, more and more of the architecture is represented with lines of neon. And that is mostly shown in a piece of scenery that I particularly love, and we call it the Neon Room. But it's when Pryor's hospital room kind of comes together in 3 or 4 parts and forms together to create a room created out of neon. In London, that was one big lumbering piece of scenery. And one of the joys that we got to do when we moved to Broadway was physically, it could not be one piece of scenery. We didn't have a place for it. And so using the energy and the choreography that had been created, we broke that piece up into multiple parts. We used the actors to choreograph it, to dance it around the stage, and allowed us to have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more breath, and to kind of use the kinetic energy of it to really propel the storytelling forward.
There is a sort of, I would say, freedom to the overall set and a bit more abstractness versus, you know, the original production, which is a bit more literal. Excuse me. I would say, was there a conscious choice away from that original staging, and how did the sort of aesthetic come about?
Yeah, I think the aesthetic came about primarily because Marianne Elliott wished to take both of Millennium and Perestroika and see it as one story. Whereas originally, as we know, Millennium was written and then a year went by and then Perestroika was written and then the two played together. But in this instance, she very much wanted to find one arc of storytelling that really worked and that there was one play told in 2 parts. And so that's why you see kind of a sense of realism slowly over the course of the 2 evenings, drifting away into more minimalism. And so that by the end, it really is the bare space, the empty space. And I think that drove the aesthetic, that allowed us to understand that we were going to start more specific and get more abstract.
This is the particular kind of work you're doing on this. It's not like that scenic adaptation. You had similar type of work on Wicked, correct?
Yeah, you cut out there for a second, so maybe you might need to repeat the question because I only heard the beginning and the end, unfortunately.
I'm sorry. I was just saying this is not your first time doing scenic adaptation. I know you've done similar work on Wicked. What draws you to do this type of work?
Well, my relationship on Wicked is slightly different because I was part of the original team from day one when it was really just the script. All of the adaptation that we've done with Wicked over the last 15 years has been primarily in an effort to roll it out internationally and have it produced in other markets around the world. So we took the Broadway production, which was, as big as it possibly could be, all the bells and whistles. And then the first iteration or adaptation of that would have been for the first national tour in the United States. And then the second iteration of that would have been kind of our international rollout when we did it in London for the West End production. And so in that instance, it is taking kind of all the ideas that we had come up with on Broadway, and then of course finding really clever and technological solutions to be able to pack it up into a dozen trucks and be able to load it in 2 days, in venues all across the United States. But it's a similar thing that I've done with Billy Elliot and other productions, whereas you have an idea that is really inherent to a sit-down production when you're actually be able to dive into the orchestra pit or go into the trap room, have lifts, things like that. That's harder to do when you are traveling a show or perhaps taking it to a venue where the theater or the venue just doesn't have the same machinery or the same opportunities. And so it's always taking the original ideas, the design ideas, and instead of looking at it as if cutting, a lot of people always talk about cutting shows down. I don't see it like that. I think that theater is always evolving. It's a living and breathing art. And if you work with collaborators, you can always find solutions that are very often better than the ones you started with, because you have a chance to kind of go back, reimagine it, use the original ideas as research, and always take a step forward. In fact, on Wicked, some of the ideas that we developed for this touring productions and for the international productions were so good and different that we ultimately brought them back and added them back to the Broadway show, so that the Broadway show was always, the pinnacle.
Oh, wow.
But it's a nice opportunity to be able to take new ideas and bring it back to the original.
That's awesome. And with this production, Angels in America has this huge legacy. It was a previous Tony winner. It won the Pulitzer for Millennium Approaches. And now your nomination for this revival is part of its 11 nomination haul, which now makes it the most Tony-nominated play in Tony Awards history. So what does it feel like for you to kind of join that legacy?
Well, it's an incredible feeling, honestly. When we got 11 Tony Award nominations for the play, it was just everybody was just over the moon. And well deserved. I think that, from the top down, from our producers who just had, the drive to tell this story and to put it on Broadway, and Marianne, who's just had an incredible vision, and her whole team. It's just the actors obviously are just top notch in the top of their game. It's a great family. I have to say, it's one of the best groups of people that I've ever had an opportunity to collaborate with. And I'm not just saying that, sometimes you go to tech and you're in there every day from 8 a.m. till midnight for weeks on end, slogging through the show, and people are people. And sometimes, you just knuckle through. But I have to say, it was a joy to come to work. It really was. Polly Constable, the lighting designer, Adrian, sound designer, everybody was just an absolute joy to work with. We had a great time. We problem solved together. We saw every challenge as an opportunity. And it was really just almost such an undertaking, so much theater to be able to have to tech it, that everybody just kind of went forward and just made the best of it and really had a fantastic time. So on top of all the awards, which are of course really wonderful and an honor to receive, it's just the enjoyment of actually doing the show, I think, will live in my memory as one of the most beautiful moments of theater that we've had.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. It's an incredible achievement. I've already gone to see it twice, and hopefully I can catch it again.
Oh, fantastic.
So congrats on everything, and best of luck for the Tonys upcoming.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Have a great one.
You too.